Hello, my name is Colin McDougall, and this is going to serve as my video presentation over the impacts of VR. I apologize ahead of time for the recording of this video itself. My recording situation is a little bit scuffed as of now, so I will be recording the presentation I've created on my iPad with my phone. So I apologize ahead of time, and I hope it is not too unbearable. But let's get started. All right, to begin, the impacts of VR. First, I think it is important to discuss the two main viewpoints of VR, which we started out the unit of VR discussing. First would be digitalism, and this is the idea that anything purely digital, such as VR, still holds value. Now, as a gamer myself, and have been for as long as I've been alive, I wholeheartedly align with this point of view. Saying that something purely digital does not give any value whatsoever is a little bit of an ignorant take in my belief. Because today, with everything being so technologically based, it's like to say that the majority of things used today hold no value is a little bit of a dumb viewpoint in my opinion. I would say that I gain a lot of value from a lot of purely digital things such as games, VR, text messages. I can't physically hold text messages. I can physically hold the phone that sends said text messages, but I cannot physically hold it, which would mean that it wouldn't fall into the digitalism category. So, in stark contrast to digitalism, we have fictionalism. This is the idea that anything purely digital does not hold any value whatsoever, and that only physical things hold value. Kind of touched on this just a second ago, but to align with fictionalism is to say that anything purely digital holds no value whatsoever. Again, I do believe this is a bit of an ignorant take, because to say that anything purely digital holds no value whatsoever, in my opinion, is completely false. Because number one, to say that something purely digital holds no value is to say that every paper, every PowerPoint, everything I've ever done for school since I've been at the University of Kentucky would hold zero value at all, which is inherently incorrect, because I have gained much value from these assignments that I've done purely digitally, because it's allowed me to pass my courses and move on in college, which is a bit of contrast to fictionalism, because it just essentially completely negates it. It's like, because I'm saying that I do gain some value from something that is purely digital. I cannot hold the PowerPoint, I cannot hold the papers that I write, unless I print them out, but they would still be purely digital in the tech that I created it on. So I think it's a bit of a bad idea. One main text that we read in class is The Virtual and the Real by Chalmers. It is in this text that Chalmers argues that VR is a legitimate plane of existence and holds value. He essentially states that VR holds value, whether that be value within itself, and the digital objects that are within the VR hold value, maybe not in the physical world, but they hold value in the digital world, which is still considered some sort of value, which goes against the idea of fictionalism. He also goes on to state that people can also gain some value, whether that be joy or any other emotion or feeling that they get for using VR. Next, we can go on to the ethics of VR. Sorry, trying to fit it into the frame. The ethics of VR, the main text that discusses the ethics about VR is Macmillan and King's Why Be Moral in a Virtual World. It is this text that we based a lot of our discussions on, where we split up into groups in class and discussed various, controversial topics such as virtual rape, virtual slavery, virtual killing, and I cannot remember the last one. But it is here where we have to ask the moral question on if people do these unspeakable things in VR, if they matter as much as if somebody did them in the physical world, would that matter as much in contrast? It is my belief that it may not hold as much inherent, how should I say, value that affects people physically, which is just, I feel like is true. But I do believe that it kind of shows what kind of person somebody is, or it can kind of like show like whether or not somebody is going to do some of these things in the physical world. Because the big idea of the text, why be moral in a virtual world, is the idea of ethics, and the fact that the only reason that we act ethical in the physical world is due to the, how should I say, the backlash we would receive if we were to not act ethically in the physical world. Whereas in the virtual world, there is no real repercussions to acting in such terrible fashions. It is not out of the realm of possibility to say that virtual rape, virtual slavery, virtual killing is not fantasized by people, but kind of is at the same time, because there are some very odd individuals in this world, as sad as it is to say. But it could also, VR could also be used as like an outlet for these terrible, like, I don't even know how to explain it, urges, I would say. But I do believe that there is some impact of ethics due to the decisions that people make in VR, and could lead to physical, like real world repercussions if not addressed early enough. The ethics of VR is truly a very difficult topic, as there are so many levels of ethical questions that can be asked of VR. And this goes into 20, 30 years down the road, if the AI or NPCs essentially turn more sentient than us in VR, and the things that can happen in VR, and whether or not that is ethical, but the kind of reaching here with some of the questions. And I think one very good example when discussing the ethics of VR is a little show called Sword Art Online. Sword Art Online is an anime that came out, I think, in the 2010s. It's been a very long time since I've watched it, but I believe it is a very applicable example for this topic. A quick synopsis on the story. In the show, a new VR game gets released to the public, and VR is very far beyond what we have in real life today. So much so that it not plugs into your brain essentially, but it has more control, or you can kind of gain more control in the VR world with your brain than right now, because right now we just put on the headset and we just see, but like you actually you lay down, put the headset on, and plug into the game, which is what allows for the next part, which is players in the said new VR game get trapped in the game, and if they die in the game, they die in real life. In order to get out of this VR world, they must beat the game to successfully escape, and not to spoil it, but eventually they do get out. I think this is a very applicable topic, because we have this VR world that is very, very comparable to the one that we are discussing, where physical repercussions are not thought of when doing things in the virtual world. And here you have all of these characters who go into the VR world, and like they're just playing a game, and then all of a sudden they essentially are told that if you die in the game, you die in real life. So essentially, the VR game becomes real life, which adds a whole new facet of how people would act, like whole new level of reasoning that has to go into the decisions made in the VR world, which I think is a very good thing to compare when discussing the ethics of VR, because in the show, you go from very lighthearted, just people doing whatever it takes to level up in the game, whether that take dying, cheating, whatever it takes, to people legitimately having to live their lives in the game and having to make ethical decisions in the game, where if they make the wrong decision, if they act crassly or out of line, they could be ostracized or even killed on the spot, which I think is a very interesting comparison to make, because it really shows how thin the line is between the physical and digital worlds. Because if the coin can flip that quickly, where the VR world becomes the physical world within a matter of seconds, I think it is interesting that we can just kind of still have these ethical discussions on the mass differences of the ethical question, or the ethics of VR versus the physical. Next is the impact of VR on its users. I myself own a VR headset, which I use to play a number of VR games via the headset. For me, it is very easy to become immersed in whatever game I choose to play. I am more of a military game shooter enjoyer, I should say. And so I am more partial to games where I'm actually in the game. I am with a gun, like not shooting actual people, but like Call of Duty or something. I draw value from this. I draw value from every game / thing I play or do, whether it be happiness due to playing it, or a thought-provoking story or interaction I have in it. It is through VR that I can, if you've ever heard of VR chat, you can go in and talk to many people on the VR headset and essentially just be in a big lobby with a bunch of other people on VR who are just interacting, talking, doing random things. And I think it's interesting how open some people will be in VR in comparison to real life, because I feel like being in VR, you're not yourself, you're your avatar. So I think that gives people a feeling of openness, or they lack the restrictions they may feel in the physical world, and they feel as though they're allowed to be more expressive, which I found happens a lot, because there are some very odd and questionable things that are said in VR chat that I don't think would be said in the real world. But that's always a odd discussion to have. VR, it allows people to kind of disconnect from the real world if they so desire, sort of like in Ready Player One, whenever we saw the entirety of society essentially being based out of VR because of overpopulation and other things that we saw what was wrong with the world in the movie. And sadly, the heavy financial impact of VR. VRs are not cheap whatsoever. You can find, the very awful trash, essentially faux VR headsets for very cheap, but you are not going to get the experience or like the true extent of what VR is and should be unless you are willing to put down some serious money. So it can definitely negatively impact somebody if they are not well enough financially. Next is frequent overuse of VR could cause negative effects on people. This is very true. I am a gamer to a fault. I play like there's no tomorrow, VR included. It is very true that it can cause some serious problems, such as overuse can cause some serious eye issues. I've always had a problem in my eyes for a while, and being in VR definitely does not help. There are some things that you can use to get around this, such as spacers for glasses, some other things that you can buy on Amazon that people have thought of and made, not from mainstream sources, but individual creators on Amazon, Etsy kind of things. There are games and applications that allow people to learn and improve themselves via VR. This is a bit of a positive impact of VR, which you can say, because there are a number of things on VR that take advantage of what VR brings and allows people to learn and improve and do different things to better themselves in the real world through VR. One of these things being, I know there is an application that has come out somewhat recently of not a sightseeing game, but it's kind of like a geography kind of thing. It is a VR experience where you can go to these big name, famous places such as like Egghead Island or Mount Fuji in Japan, or the Washington D.C. if you lived outside of the United States. Like, you can experience these places through VR, and tacked on are little facts and other things about said place in the application where people can actually learn of these big name places and do more than just go in and play a video game and hop out. They can actually go in, experience, and learn certain things about the world and improve themselves. Finally, is having these applications create true and real sources of value that people can utilize to better themselves in the real world. Like I just discussed with the geography game or the geography application, it's people can get value other than just joy or just trying to fill out some time playing a game. There are also some job and schooling applications that allow people to learn digitally, whether that be learning how to do a job, learning in a school, in a classroom. There are so many options in VR. You just have to kind of go on and find them. To end it off, VR is a game-changing technological revolution that allows for new heights of technological advancements and allowing people to have new experiences while also being accompanied by a plethora of impactful philosophical and ethical questions of which will help develop VR as it moves forward into the future. I do believe that VR is going to just continue to evolve as the years go by, and whether that is a good or a bad thing, I think it will be left to see. But I do hope, as a frequent user of VR, that the negative impacts of the VR will hopefully diminish as the years go by. But that is a personal desire, and one can only hope. And here are my references. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.